Having kids will open your eyes to all kinds of things, because kids have a way of saying things and that you're kind of like, did that really just come out of a person's mouth? Like, you actually used words in the English language and put them together and said that. You know, I can't believe that you said that you did that, that you thought that you could actually get away with that. And I actually, before I tell a bunch of stories to rat out my kids, had this moment recently where I realized that as a kid, I had done that very thing. I was taking Mary Kate to soccer practice, and one of those only rare days where I was early. So she actually practices where I used to live out in Robinson, Texas. And so I started driving her around. Got a Robinson fan? Go Rockets. So I started going around and I was like, this house I lived in. And I said, actually, these people over here taught me how to play video games, and this guy over here taught me to play soccer, and I drove down the street. She used to take me to school, and then I went around another street. When I went around that street, I realized I came to a street and a house that I had not thought about in about 31 years. And when I tell you the story, you'll know why I had blocked this out of my mind. And I sat there frozen like, oh my gosh, that's it. And Keiki was like, what? And I was like, well, and all of a sudden I started having compassion, because I get on my kids all the time, like, no, you can't, no, we can't, no, you cannot take your green beans and put them on your face, or you can't, no, you can't hit him, in the face, or there's just things like that. You're just like, no, you can't do that. Why did you even say that? And I remember I was sitting in front of this house, and it dawned on me that I was like 7 or 8 years old. I was playing at my friend David's house. And David, we did a carpool thing, so I knew his family and they knew him. But his dad scared me to death. His dad was always that angry dad and mean, and he was always smoking. So he had like the cigarette hanging out of his lip, and he's mad at you the whole time for you don't know what. Sorry, microphone malfunction. And he made dentures. So you would go into his garage, and he'd be making, and it just stunk all the time. I'm like, smoker making your dentures? It just wasn't making sense to me. And so he was just so mean. So I kept my distance from this dad for sure. And one day we were outside. He had this fort in the middle of his backyard. We were trying to decide what to play. And my friend David came up with this idea. He goes, I got an idea. Why don't we have a brick fight? Like a human being had to take words from the English language and put that into a sentence. Let's have a brick fight. To which I responded with, okay, Now, I go, how do you have a brick fight? He goes, well, one person's at the top of the fort and the other person's down on the ground. And we just throw bricks at each other. I'm 7 or 8, but already my mind is thinking, going up, we're 7. Like, it's like, ding, ding, like landing against the fort. And he goes, I said, all right, who goes first? He goes, why don't you go to the top of the fort first? And I was like, sweet. So I'm over the fort. I'll never forget. I can still see him running to the back to surprise me and hurling this brick. And it just went, ding, and it just landed at my feet. Like it went, boom, landed right there, And that happened like 2 or 3 times, where I then would remember I told y'all 2 weeks ago I was a delayed rule breaker, So I would like miss him on purpose. I would be like, he's running that way. I'd be like, and I'm like, oh, I missed, Because I'm kind of like, we're playing brick fight. This is, weird. And then finally the 3rd time he throws one right directly at me, and it lands like here, like way far away from me. And I picked it up. He ran back to the brick pile. I can still see him. He's sitting right over there. And I just remember, I can still see it in my head. I literally just went, can you catch this? Here it comes. No, I'm just kidding. Joan Hobbs is like, oh, Lord, I'm about to do counseling with some girl in the front row. So I threw it, and when it left my hand, it was like that text that you send that you wish you could stop mid-time, You're like, if there was a button you could push, be like, no. Because I knew this thing's going. And it starts to go down, and the corner of the brick lands right in the top of this guy's head. This hurts just doing this. I wasn't even like in a fort. So as you learn with kids, there's the cry that you do, like when a buddy hits them, and they're like, ah! But when something like that happens, and there's the delayed cry. Oh, yeah. It is like coming from the feet, and it's like coming up and up and up. And then "Ah!" And even if it's not a bad cut on your head, it's just bleeding everywhere. And so he runs to his dad. I'm chasing him into the land of dentures when his dad sees blood coming out. He's like, what happened? And I was like, David can't talk. He's so traumatized. I'm like, we were playing brick fight, And you're hoping he'll be like, oh, okay, brick fight, sure. Yeah, David, it's going to be fine. But instead, he's looking at me and he's looking at David. He goes and gets a towel. I can still see the yellow towel, wraps his son's head up. And there's just, blood everywhere. And he is holding his son out. Now I'm crying. I am losing it. And I'll never forget that when we got out to the car, he put David in the car. He turned around and he said, don't you go anywhere. When I come back, I'm dealing with you. And I was like, And so people heard all the commotion. They came out, all the neighbors. I knew them. They left to go to the hospital. I stayed for about 20 minutes. I was like, I'm here forever, land of dentures, prison. And finally, I cried so much that people around were like, it's okay, I don't think he's going to hurt you. Like, yeah, he's going to kill me. And so finally someone said, why don't you go home? And that's the first time I thought, that's a great idea. And I got on my bike, I hauled it home, got home, told my mom, and I'm just like, I was in a brick fight. Now, that's why I have so much compassion now. When my kids come and tell me things, I need to remember things like this. So I'm just like, you did what? You graffitied the walls at school, and you thought that was a good idea. I won't say which kid did that, but someone did. And so you just get to the point where you're like, oh, that was normal in my head until it came out of my mouth, And so here's the weird thing, is that I did everything in my power to make sure that I never went on his street again. That's what was so weird when I took Mary Kate and drove around. I realized I have not been on this street in 30 years. I did everything in my power to keep my distance from David and the Reichert family. I kept myself completely distant from them. About 5 years later, we were at the pool, the public pool there, and I saw their family walk in the door. And as raw as the fort experience was, years ago, it was raw in that moment. And I remember I swam to the other side of the pool and held my breath underneath. I'm just going to stay down here. Just stay down here. Stay down here. Stay down here. But David eventually saw me and he came over and he was so normal. Like, hey, what's up? And I was like, nothing. How's your head? What do you talk about? And he was trying to be so normal, and I could see my mom was talking to his mom, and I literally couldn't even swim that good. I'm like on the deep end of the pool, dodging the people jumping off the diving board, just totally keeping my distance from their family. And then after that pool experience, did everything in my power to stay away from their street, to stay away from public places where I would see, where I knew they would be, totally kept my distance, and can say that all these years later, I've never seen them. Thank God. Because I still think they're telling this story in their house, and his dad's like, well, I see that boy, And I told him I'm going to have to deal with him, and I'm going to have to deal with him. And I can still feel the weight of that. Now, you're talking about a brick fight, and you're probably thinking, Carl, you're an idiot, and I was. But maybe I could just kind of take this down to the next level for you, because if you've ever had a situation where you try to keep your distance from somebody else, you know what an all-consuming passion and focus that becomes. If they're just an awkward person, if you broke up with them, and then your best friend is like their sister, and you whatever it is, then there's like the person that they cheated you and you hurt them, or whatever it is. When you find yourself in a potential situation, you're back at homecoming, you're all there, and you just know they're in the field stadium somewhere, and you just have to go to the bathroom for 25 minutes. Because you can feel the distance growing. There's something in us that naturally knows how to go into distance mode. And then if you're not careful, you can find yourself 30 years later and wonder where those people are. And I actually went on Facebook last week to find him. I couldn't find him. It's like, hope he's alive. I think he is, but and he's alive. He's fine. But you feel that tension whenever there is something inside of you that you're carrying that then causes distance. And so tonight, I want to talk to you a little bit about that distance. You've already heard us share a little bit about where we've been these last couple of weeks. Week 1, we asked you a question. Are you more of a rule breaker or a rule follower? By the end of the night, I think we were all pretty convinced that we're all rule breakers who are in need of a God who can come and purge the evil from our midst. And last week, we talked about this whole scenario of being a name rememberer or a name forgetter, that the people of Israel in the days of Elijah had forgotten who they were, and they needed a moment where Elijah could say, you've forgotten who you were. And he sets up these stones, he sets up this altar, the fire of God comes, and they all fall, and then they remember his name and they say, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. And we ended by saying, let's be name rememberers of our God and name forgetters of these awful name tags that we picked up throughout the years. And tonight, we're going to close out our series, Redemption Has a Name, by looking at 10 people that were not even given a name in the Scriptures. We're going to be looking in the book of Luke. And we're going to look in chapter 17. And the subtitle of this specific place, verse 11, discusses 10 lepers. These lepers, are not even given a name. We just know them by their disease. We just know them by this malfunction of their life that they've been cursed with. And I want to just take this verse by verse to see if there's some things that we can learn about what to do when we feel distance. And verse 11 says, on the way to Jerusalem, he, meaning Jesus, was passing along between Samaria and Galilee. Now let me just pause there, because a lot of times we read a verse like that, we kind of fast forward through it. And you may not realize that this is more than just a setup to what's about to happen. If you were a Jewish person and you read that, that would make you pause and go, he did what? Because you would know that Jewish people and Samaritans are totally separated from each other and do not intermix. To the Jewish mind, the Samaritan was the most unclean, evil, vile person. And you would not even, this is serious, they would not even like eat after them or drink after them. They did not want to be on the same roads they had been on. So here, I won't be your Christian Scriptures map, but just go with me for a moment. Basically, like when he says he was passing between Samaria and Galilee, it's like Galilee's here, Samaria's here, on his way to where? Jerusalem here. So he's right up here in between Galilee and Samaria going here. But here's the deal about Jews. Jews typically had to make at least one annual trek down to Jerusalem. And they were so on the alert against Samaritans, they typically went around Samaria to get down to Jerusalem. So if you lived over here in Galilee and you want to get to Jerusalem, it's a straight shot this way. But because of the water on this coast, you couldn't go on that side otherwise by boat. So what they would do is they would go all the way around this way to get down to here. And Jesus is positioning himself in a place that other Jews would not go. He's on the way to Jerusalem, right in between Samaria and Galilee. And I'm sure people reading this back in those days would have been like, what was he doing? He has no business being there. You serve a God who puts himself into places he has no place being. Verse 12, and as he entered a village, he was met by 10 lepers. These people, we don't even know their name. We just know their disease. And I want you to read these words with me. Who did what? Stood at a distance. They stood at a distance. Now, let me explain a little bit about why they stood at a distance. Because if you were with us last year at the very beginning of our year together, we talked a little bit about this leprosy thing. This is kind of weird for us because we don't interact with people who have leprosy. We have vaccines and things to take care of that. We're all good here, other than a few remote leper colonies in India or other places in Asia. We don't deal with that, so we don't know just the fact that what this leprosy thing would have done for people. But this would have been like the curse of all curses. There's no hope. You have this. There's no shot for you. You're pretty much done. So as a result, there were 3 results that you had to live with as a result of having leprosy. One of those was you kept consistent geographical distance between you and humanity, mankind, villages. You were on the outside consistently. You had to keep that distance outside the camp. The second thing you had to do was if you did come up because you needed food or whatever, then you had to start yelling and announcing, unclean, unclean, unclean. That's how you announced yourself. Your name tag as a leper when you would walk up was something along the line of hopeless, because you had just to declare, unclean is coming towards you. We've all been in a situation where we felt that, felt gross, felt dirty, felt out of the loop, felt like we didn't fit in, but we don't walk in places announcing it. You had to announce it. And then they announce it, that the unclean one is coming, and people would just spread and keep far away, covering themselves, making sure that they didn't catch any of the contagious germs of what you had. And the third thing you had to do is if by some luck of the draw you did get better, then you had to go to the priest. The priest was kind of like your doctor who would kind of sign your card and say, yep, he's all better, and Now you're good to go. That's what these 10 lepers would have had to have dealt with. Now, again, for us, we can't imagine living in a hopeless disease like that because we don't have leprosy. But I think we can all relate to having something inside of us that we're going, I wish I could get rid of this. Why is this still here? I went to church camp and I prayed about this and I told my youth pastor, and why is it still here? Why am I still fighting this? I asked for forgiveness, and I heard the sermon last week, and I came to the front and thought it was all gone, but still there were some thoughts or there were some temptations, and it's still there. And I find that when those places come in and grip our heart, that's the place of greatest distance for us as believers. We can know that redemption has a name. We can know he does redeem, and we can know his name is worthy. We can know we are saved, and so therefore we're going to heaven. We can be thankful and sing songs about that. We can know his name is worthy, so we need to keep him central. But then in those places where sin is dominating our life, or there's something that's coming in, it feels like the curse of all curses that we can't get rid of. And so quite frequently, it's often you'll see believers who will walk into church, and what you'll do is you'll look at them, and if we had a little radar, what we'd see is they're walking in screaming, unclean, unclean, and the song starts getting sung and the sermon gets preached, but there's a distance happening between that person in that chair or that pew and a God who's redeemed them. And the question they're asking is, yes, you've redeemed me and you've saved me, and yes, your name is worthy, but I am not worthy, and there's a distance. And there can be that calling out of, I'm unclean. That's the mark of the pre-redeemed person, is distance. And let's see what God does with this distance and how these people respond. Let's continue on in Luke 17. And it says in verse 13, as they're at this distance, so they can't come close to him, it says, they lifted up their voices saying, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. Wow, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. I want to tear apart this sentence of what they said, because I love the fact that they are calling out for mercy. Basically, did anybody ever play the game Mercy with your little brothers or you know? And so you get up there and you get ready to do a little mercy action, and you're like, ready, go. All right, so Vance, come on up here. Let me just take you real quick, okay? So. Anyway, so it'd be, if you're like, no, I didn't do that, that's because you were sweet, okay? But the rest of us, we were all trying to kill each other. So you go like this, and then you start going that way, and then that person starts coming on you. You can actually do something, all right? And so so if I couldn't take it anymore, so then I would go down, and usually you would just laugh at them, right? You would just take them down to the ground, down to the ground, down to the ground, until finally they cry out what? Mercy. Again, we thought that was a good idea. Break their knuckles, and then when they smell mercy, you're okay, all right? Thanks, Vance. So that was the whole heart behind mercy. Basically, take this person to a breaking point, and then when they get to the breaking point, they'll yell mercy, and then what? You give. Basically what they're saying when their hand is back like that is, I can't take anymore. My hand's about to snap. My wrist's going to break. I can't take anymore. I am at a breaking point. So when these lepers are saying, Jesus, Master, have mercy, they are saying, we are at a breaking point. The separation from humanity, the lack of dignity we have, no job, no money, begging for everything we have, our skin literally deteriorating, most likely ears, noses, things like that falling off our bodies. We are at a breaking point. We can't take this anymore. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been there? You ever been at that breaking point where you're like, I can't do this anymore. When it rains, it pours. It's pouring. I can't take this. That seems like such a big gap to go from leprosy to some of the scenarios we find ourselves in. But in the moment when you find yourself in those scenarios, they feel so huge, don't they? Like as a dad, I feel like, why is it that all at once my car breaks down, the dishwasher, explodes, the pipes under the house become like geysers, and and the back room catches on fire this week. And there can be that moment where I don't even answer Blair's phone call because I know she's going to say, the house burned down, And I'm just going to be like, oh, you just get to a break point. You're like, I can't do it anymore, Test week is coming for you guys very soon. And it's like, did they all get together and say, let's kill the freshmen on this day? Like, how would I have 4 tests on this day, And you can be like, okay, you win. Mercy. Like, can we stop the madness? All of a sudden, you put those scenarios and they get a little deeper than dishwashers and tests, and it can feel emotionally with relational rifts and the issues of our life and go, mercy, I just can't take this anymore. I just can't do it anymore. We are so fortunate to be taught by these lepers what the language of our life should be in breaking points. And I'm going to teach you the language of lepers. And here it is. Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. We sang a song last week to end our time. It was new for all of us, called Let It Be Jesus. We chose that very deliberately because of those first lines that we sang. Let it be Jesus, the first name that I call. That though I value community and friendships and relationships and everything else, I want my first name that I call to be Jesus. I want it to be His name that I call. What's that second word? Master. I believe this is so pivotal, that it's Jesus and Master. Because these people who have come to a point of breaking are now saying, I am willing to come to a point of obeying. It didn't say, Jesus, friend. Jesus, one who loves us. It wasn't just Jesus and then a place of give and take. It was Master, Lord, King. You are reigning superior God, Master. And I think that in a generation like your generation that is so known for worship and a passion for worship and a love for worship, we can sometimes, in the midst of that, which I love and I'm hoping for even more of in the days ahead, that at the same time that we would not just be the generation known that we just are buddy-buddy with this God, but instead we are actually getting to worship a God who is Master. And the fact that we are name rememberers, and it's wild to think He actually knows my name, that I am not distant from this one, but He knows my name. But just because He knows my name does not put Him at buddy-buddy, my homeboy. He is still Master. And when you come to this point where you come to a point of breaking, at that point, then you can cry out words like, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. And the breaking can lead you to that point where you'll say, you're my Master, and I will obey. And in that place of learning the language of lepers, then Jesus responds. And it says, when He saw them, in verse 14, when He saw them, He said to them, go and show yourselves to the priests. And as they went, they were cleansed. Go and show yourselves to the priests would make sense, right? Because in Leviticus, we learned those three things we're supposed to do. And the third one was what? If by some chance you get better, go to the priest. The only issue is they're not better at that point. So we get the last sentence, and as they went, they were cleansed. Like, yeah, that makes sense. But they were like, okay, well, you only go to the priest if you're better. Last time I checked, he didn't have a nose, and I don't have ears. So why are we going anywhere? This is a very foolish moment. You must have seen them all like, okay. And they're walking off. This is a foolish moment. But you know what? When you come to the point of breaking, you'll come to the point of obeying. Another story in the Old Testament you find in 2 Kings of a guy who had leprosy, and he comes up to this prophet and says, please, would you heal me? He goes, go dip in the Jordan River 7 times. He's like, the Jordan River? That's like the grossest thing ever. No, and he walks off. His servant has to go to him and say, if he had asked for $1 billion, you'd give it to him, but you won't go get wet. 7 times later, he comes up and he's better. But it's so foolish. Why would I have to do this? You know, because what we're realizing is that a prideful person won't take that foolish step. A prideful person won't take the next step, but a broken person will. A surrendered person who says Jesus and Master, not Jesus, the man upstairs, but Jesus, Master, that person will say, dip in the Jordan River 7 times, I got that. Go show myself to the priest while my body's deteriorating, I got that. And I just have to wonder if God is wanting to initiate with us about how to be a people of obedience. And I love that they were not yet cleansed yet, and they could take that step. A lot of times we think we have to get our lives all together for God, and then finally his blessing will come down from heaven. And it'll just be like this little pixie dust, and boom, and then all of a sudden we're better and we could fly. But these people were willing to take the step, and in the midst of their mess, in the midst of their junk, they take off. And they're willing to take that foolish step, because when you're broken, you'll take those steps of obedience. And my question for us is, what about us? Will we obey regardless of if we see it all, if it all makes sense? Because if we're known as a people of obedience, if we're a as they went people, then I think what we'll see is those steps of obedience can lead us to what they're cleansing. I love that it says they were cleansed. Like if you get better from the flu, do you say, I had the flu, but I've been cleansed? That's kind of weird. Like, you did? Yeah, I had the chicken pox, but don't worry, I've been cleansed. Like when people talk about the cleansing they're going through, I'm like, I don't want to hear that. There's a whole other thing that they're talking about. Why would they say, you leper, you are now cleansed? Because they have been screaming, unclean, unclean, unclean. And now, these ones who've come to a breaking point are now willing to become obedient people. In the obedient place, they become healed. And that healing for them is not just you're better, it's you're clean. You're clean. He's made you clean. And they're going to that priest, because the priest is the one who looks at you and says, you are now officially clean. And he signs his name on that document, and you're good to go. And it's all going to be changed from that point forward. In verse 15, it says, then one of them. Everybody say one. One. Then one of them, and I'm about to point you to one of the most poignant scriptures that you can read. I just hope that this grabs you, because out of this passage, this should just punch us all right in the face. It says, then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, did what? Turned back, praising God with a loud voice. Then one of them, just one, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. Now, he's been given a command, go to the priest. So the turning back is seemingly disobedient. It's kind of like, did you not get the message we're supposed to go to the priest? So sometimes we'll look at this story and it'll be like, and only one really got it. But the other 9 are probably thinking, well, he told us to go to the priest, So they go to the priest. But one of them, he totally makes an about face. And he turns and he goes back. And what's interesting is that we find out a little bit about this one in the next verse. Verse 16, it says, and he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. Period. Next sentence. Now he was a Samaritan. Oh, it makes sense now. This guy would have known the rules anyway. I mean, if they were like, go see the priest, he'd have been like, why? Go see a priest? I mean, I need something else. I'm messed up. But the Samaritan would not have been going by those rules. He would not have been living by those rules. He would just be going along, look at his body and be like, my nose is back, my ears are back, everything's gone. I'm completely better. I don't know any better, but to do what? But to turn. And the result of this one who has gone through a breaking and an obeying and then finding his healing is to be a turning. His default is to turn, and he runs back to Jesus. And he's on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. But he's a Samaritan, meaning he has no business here. And this should be one that Jesus shouldn't be let touching his feet. Because he's a Samaritan. And even if he doesn't have leprosy, he's unclean to these Jews. But that's not your Jesus, and that's not the way that the mercy of Jesus operates. He steps in the midst of this Samaritan, and he says that this one is clean. Now, what does it look like in the life of an individual when you find yourself going, is there anything good in me? Is there something about me that God could use? And you just wonder, this Samaritan, all of a sudden, he's broken the distance gap. But you just have to wonder, what about me today? What do I do if there is a distance, if there's a gap? Sometimes the best way to put all of that together is by hearing the story of someone who had to put it together for themselves. So tonight, I'm going to stop preaching and let someone else preach. Y'all ready to hear from Grace Nelson? Come on up, Grace. This is Grace's section, so they love this lady. But I wanted Grace to take a minute and to share her story, because I think that maybe some people in the room could relate to her story. Take it away, Grace.
Hello. So like Carl said, my name is Grace. That is my family over there, my section. I have the honor and privilege of leading a section with Sam Goff and Jeff James. So I just want to tell you a story about the faithfulness of God, and my heart is that after hearing this, that you will realize the pursuit of God on your life, because God has pursued me in an incredible way. So I came to college, a broken mess. Giving some background, I had an older brother that had gone off to college and came back an agnostic, and shared a lot of his ideas about life with me, and it really tripped me up about the time I was a junior in high school, and started really questioning what I believed and where I stood on a lot of things. And so, and have a long history of a lot of brokenness in my life, a lot of sexual sin, a lot of addiction, and just really struggled with, who am I? What is my purpose in life? And I would say that I am a very wholehearted, passionate person, and I am always looking for authenticity. And so throughout high school, I would have little spurts of getting really curious about church and about Christianity and Jesus. And I would go to church and youth group with my friends, and I would just notice, I was like, man, it seems so dead. All the people that are here are sleeping with each other on the weekends and getting drunk together. So if the Christians are doing this, then Jesus must not be real. And so came into college carrying that burden, and saw college as an opportunity to really find out what I thought about life and what I believed in. And so dove immediately into even deeper sin that I had ever gone into. And that basically led me to a point where I was really scared that I was pregnant. And I remember pulling up to my apartment one day and just feeling this weight of loneliness. Do you know when you're like carrying something all alone, like you have absolutely no hope? And it's kind of that unexplainable thing. I mean, that is probably the most I've ever experienced that in my life. But driving up to my apartment, and praise the Lord, I was not pregnant, but at the time I didn't know that. Pull up to my apartment, and I just said, you know, Jesus, if you are real, I really don't believe that you are, but if you are, would you come and change my life? Because I really have nothing left. And about a week later, because God hears the prayers of his people, I came to Waco originally, backtrack, came to Waco originally as a freshman on a dance team out here, and a choreographer came in from LA, was swagged out, just like a cool girl with flat bill hat, high top Nikes, just swag, okay? And I was like, man, this girl is awesome. She's an incredible hip-hop dancer, works with Britney Spears, and she ends up sharing the gospel with our team at the end of our practice. And I was mind blown. I was like, this girl looks like she knows Jesus. Like, she has a relationship with him. It's not just an idea to her. And so it really got my heart curious. I just started wondering, I think this is really what I want. I think God is trying to show me that he is the truth, because all I really wanted was truth. So if you're here tonight seeking truth, you're in a good place. And so started a process in my life of just saying, okay, God, I still don't know if I really believe that you're real, but I'm just going to take another step forward. So go home that Christmas break after fall semester of my freshman year, and it was like Jesus made his home inside of my heart, because I went home and it was like sins that I had struggled with for years made me nauseous even thinking about doing them, from the extent of addiction to the smallest thing of cussing. I was like, I can't even say this word. And so I really started believing that Jesus was doing something inside of my heart. And so came back spring semester my freshman year, and was just like I said, was taking the next step forward in the very next thing. And remember finding myself on a spring break mission trip called Awaken. I know, how the heck did I end up there? I don't know, but I did. And remember being there, and up till that point in my mind, following Jesus meant things making sense inside of your brain. Do you understand what I mean? Kind of like, okay, now it like all clicks. But God kind of flipped my world upside down, and I realized on that spring break trip, during the spring break trip, it's a lot of sharing Jesus with people and seeing God do really the impossible, and seeing God move in powerful ways. I realized that up until that point, I had viewed following Jesus as, okay, now I have it figured it out. Now I understand. But then I realized, no, God has actually been pursuing me this whole time. And by his grace, I realized that and absolutely changed my life. I would say that was the point where I said, okay, Jesus, I don't just want to follow you and have a great emotional experience my college years, but I give my heart to you. I give my life to you. And just like Carl was saying, you are master. I come underneath you because I know your goodness. And so since then, my life looks radically, completely different, obviously. I'm a changed person because of Jesus. He's done incredible things in my life. And I hope that you leave tonight knowing that he is pursuing you as an individual. And so thanks for letting me share.
Proud of you. So proud of you. So proud of you. You know, I didn't know all of Grace's story until recently, and but if you know Grace, you know that she like you said, she's passionate. She's all in, and you'll often see her on our World Mandate dance stage and just going for it. And if she's worshiping, she's going for it. And as I hearing all the pieces of Grace's story earlier, I just thought it makes sense. It makes sense that someone who feels like they've been forgiven much now worships much. And this is a perfect example. You look at someone who just feels like they're standing there and they are at a breaking point. God, if you're real, would you come? And in that point, just taking the next step, obeying the next step. And then in that place, finding that her heart's beginning to get healed. And her only response is to turn in life group and in this mission trip and walking with others. And she turns and she's just worshiping Jesus. And it makes so much sense when you read Jesus' response here. In verse 17 and 18 and 19, you'll see the burning passion. In verse 17, Jesus answered, "Were not 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" And he said to him in verse 19, "Rise and go your way. Your faith has made you well." I love those last lines. Rise and go your way. Your faith has made you well, indicating there is a physical healing that's happened. There's also a spiritual healing that's happened. You've gotten a double healing today. And you can go your way. You don't have to have your head buried in shame anymore. You don't have to keep your distance. You're never going to have to walk into places and to cry out unclean. And you're never going to have to stay on the other side of the swimming pool away from this one. You're never going to have to hold back at the garage wondering if the Father is going to come and deal with you when he gets back. Because at the root of all of our distance, at the root of all of that shame, we're actually wondering, is the Father, when he gets a hold of all of our junk, going to come to us and to deal with us the way that we should have been dealt with after throwing the brick, whatever the brick of your life was that you threw? And what we see here is a Jesus who says, no, rise up, get up, and go your way. Get up and leave the shame. And all those name tags that came on you, rise, you're not hopeless anymore. Rise, the shame is gone. Rise, you're not a pervert. That's not who you are. Rise, I'm setting you free from your fear with the perfect love of Christ. And he's dropping off the name tags. He's saying, now go your way. Go your way with your head lifted high, knowing that the one who is the lifter of your head, he has a name, and it's Jesus. And your breaking tonight may lead you to a point of obeying, that'll lead you to a place of healing, that'll lead you to a place of turning, that will lead you to where worship is the response of your heart. Because at the end of redemption is worship. At the end of redemption is full-heartedness. At the end of redemption is devotion. And God tonight wants to come, and he wants, if that's you, if you've been in that place like, I know I'm saved and I know his name is worthy, but I still feel like there's a distance. I think God wants to come to you tonight and say, rise, go your way. And he's going to break the distance gap for so many of us tonight.